Are you going to sing for us, Jason?
Have a James Taylor song lined up. But instead, I'm going to talk about the 120th episode of the Carmudgeon Show. My name is Jason Cammisa. That is Derek Tam-Scott.
Is that Yiddish?
I don't know. It's just festive. And we are today talking about, shocker,
vintage Mercedes-Benzes.
Yeah, but this is your fault. Derek came up with
it.
The
It is
idea.
my fault, yes. It's a specific vintage Mercedes-Benz. It is the 190E.
Otherwise known as the W201. Mm-hmm. We didn't talk about the little hatchback conversions that people made. Oh, well, we'll have to go back and record the whole episode. Just kidding.
Eberhard Schulz is famous for having done those. He's the guy who made all the Isderas. Sorry, the episode has not started yet. Do you...
yes, we need to talk about the Hagerty Drivers Club.
Hagerty Drivers Club,
if you'd like to help support this content, you should consider joining the Hagerty Drivers Club, which includes unlimited flatbed roadside is 24 hours. Hold on. Unlimited 24/7 flatbed towing for all of your classic cars, magazine subscription, access to unlimited valuation tools, and a bunch of other crap. Link below. And I think that's my job. Oh yeah. If you call out my name,
wait, he's gonna have a terrible.
Wherever I am, I'll come run. Did that?
It's going to be really hard to coordinate the video, the audio and the video because it's just a lot of clapping.
Whatever.
You'll figure it out.
Good luck, Jake. Good luck, Jake. Okay. This one's on you.
What?
Yeah.
Which one's on me?
The George Foreman thing.
Oh, George Foreman.
Yeah.
Manufacturer of grills, but not giant clams.
Something. Remember we said last week his car collection's about to hit Hagerty Marketplace.
Is it hit? Did it hit?
It has hit.
Hopefully the marketplace is okay if it just got hit by a bunch of cars.
Well, yeah, but they're lean because of the George Foreman grill thing, and they pack a big punch or something.
Yeah, but
I don't know how this works.
But also, how can they be lean if some of them are like 57 Chevy Bel Airs? That's not a very lean car.
Yeah, nobody puts a lean on those cars anymore. You can't get financing for that.
God.
Yeah.
Terrible puns. BMW Z8, Ferrari Testarossa.
There's a 129 in there.
129.
Some cool cars. So go check them out.
Interesting.
57 Bel Air.
Maybe even buy one.
You want one? Do you want a 57?
Oh, there was a Fuley. Actually, this is of particular interest. A split window Corvette coupe, and it's a Fuley, which is the top of the line model. That's the one to get. Those things have gotten ridiculously expensive.
How expensive? You'll find out.
You might even answer the question for yourself if you're the one who buys it.
Yeah. Okay. Go check that out. And also make lean meat in your George Foreman grill.
That's what I try to do every day. And on that bombshell, we'll return to this episode of the Carmudgeon Show.
How do you turn this off? Okay, we are recording, so we need to talk more about that.
Yeah. So,
would you like to explain to the audience just how you've come up with this surprise episode idea for me? Because I'm not taking the fall for this.
Because I read a book about this car, and we had a Sacco party yesterday for his 90th birthday, Bruno Sacco. Shockingly, this episode is about vintage Mercedes-Benzes.
Listen, I apologize on behalf of Derek.
And yourself.
I know, this is your fault. I walked in, we're like, what are we going to do with the episode on today? And you're like, I just read 2 books by James Taylor, and I started singing.
Which we are not going to include in this episode. In the intro, you could.
No.
When you get to the intro.
I don't think anyone wants to hear my James Taylor. But James Taylor's wonderful to sing along with because he's smooth and he's right in my vocal range. He's very easy. Anyway, you read 2 books about the Mercedes W201.
Mm-hmm. You've read one of those books.
Both of them.
Both of those books. Mm-hmm. Okay.
But this is not fair. You have an unfair advantage because you just read Quicksilver Benz 201.
Quicksilver Century.
Quick Century, it's essentially Bouncing Baby Benz is the name of the chapter.
Yes.
And I haven't read it in 10 years, but I still remember that chapter title. And then you just read the James Taylor book, and I haven't. So not only are you more photographic memory-like than I am, but you just have this top of mind. So I'm going to spout out years as like gross estimates.
I will fact check as required. And let's see. You also have owned a lot more of these cars than I have.
Okay, so I've owned. I flipped a couple of them. when I was in college to make some money. But I did my first ever true Mercedes daily driver ownership experience was a 1988 190e 2.0. It was a Euro car that my friend Mike, who we still have to do an episode on.
Yes.
Once the statute of, well, I guess once you die, I think the statute of limitations automatically expires with you.
Yes. So anyway, every character in this story, whoever does anything will be Mike.
Yeah,
even if it was you, it's actually Mike.
Good point. Yeah, that was a good point. Yeah. So I was driving down the road with my friend Mike, and so Mike saw this 190e, a Euro 190e on the side of the road, parked in Miami, and left a note on it. And like 8 months later, this German woman called him, and she's like, "Yeah, I must export the car, and I don't know what to do." And he was like, "I'll give you $2,000 for it right now." And so, because she brought it in on a tourist visa, it was able to be here for a year and then needed to be sold.
It needed to be exported. Not sold.
Yeah,
exported
or crushed. And so she didn't know what to do with it. This was in 1997, probably.
So the car was well under 25 years old at this time.
And so he pulled a move and bought it from her, pulled a move and got it registered. And in
Florida.
In Florida. And what was...
They're notoriously flexible.
Yeah. Thank God. What was different about this car? So it was 2-liter, 8-valve automatic. It was
They were all 2 liters, actually. There were never any 1.9 liters, even though they were badged as 190E. But they did put 2.0 on the back of them because people were confused when the 1.8 liter car came out. Right. And they were like, why would I get a 1.8 versus a 1.9? And it's actually 2 liters.
This was when Mercedes was still figuring out the nomenclature.
Correct.
There was a 300E 2.6.
Yes. And there was a 260E also.
Right. I mean, what the hell? Yeah. Anyway, so it was unusual in the car. So it was a Euro car. It had air conditioning, but manual dual zone climate, not climate control, the heat. And the full Recaro seats from the 2.316 in it, just in a different plaid than like plaid seats, but different cloth than the 2.316.
Yes, full cloth instead of leather with cloth inserts. They're like 124s. I assume if they're like 124s. Oh my God,
I sold this car in 2001. I mean, I haven't. I'll dig up the pictures, but either way, it was a different.
If they were like 500Es, then the sports seats would have full cloth with plaid inserts in the middle, and just instead of having leather on the bolsters.
I feel like these were leather, but
then it's like a 2.316.
It's the same seat, but it was a tighter woven, more dark gray. It was a much smaller weave, and it was great. Anyway, but rear buckets in this car, which was really neat. And the 2-liter, the Euro
was an 80 what year?
88. So
it wasn't a sport line.
It was not a sport line.
But it had sport seats.
It was just, in Germany, you don't have these packages.
Oh, sport line was a
package, but you can also just a la carte anything.
Things. Yeah.
So sunroof, air conditioning, power windows in the front, and crank windows in the back, which is the dumbest fucking thing ever.
It was kind of common back then.
Very common.
Doesn't your car have that?
No, mine crank all around.
Oh.
My current car. But we'll stick on this one because too many 2.316s, too many 201s. So anyway, I put 40,000 miles on this as a daily driver. It was 122 horsepower versus the US's 134 or 132 for the 2.3
Yeah, I think it's
liter.
123 PS.
Yeah. And it was actually quicker than the US cars. It had shorter gearing, and it weighed far less because it hadn't.
And compression. Had actual compression and cam timing.
So yeah, it was dead down low, but it was a screamer. I mean, it passed emissions every year. Must have been catalyzed. Great car. Absolutely wonderful daily driver. Had a lot of fun in it, including had a guy in a Mitsubishi Eclipse crash trying to keep up with me around an on-ramp. And it always surprised everyone on back roads. Those things are really capable. Yeah. I decided to replace it with an E36 325i automatic. I always wanted one automatic in the fleet in case I pulled my back or something, and which I did all the time because I was always working on cars and working on the house. And so the day I bought the E36 home, I listed it for sale on the Auto Trader. I hated it. It was just so not even close to as good of a car as the 190. I like the way that 190's chassis balance was better. I got in so many fights with people online because I'm like, the Mercedes doesn't understeer. It's just neutral. And this one had an ASD, which was a electronically locking rear differential.
Yes.
So you're fine coming around the corner, fading the gas in. And when the light went on, you had approximately a quarter of a second to start getting ready to correct because it would lock the rear wheels together and send it sideways and do these great drifts. Anyway, wonderful car, amazing. Sold it. God, it had to be 2000, 2001. Haven't seen it since. My next 190 I bought on my 30th birthday, sight unseen at a police auction in Pittsburgh.
Good. I love stories that start like that.
I was in Florida. I was at Mike's actually, and I was going to have my 30th birthday at his house. And Katrina had just destroyed New Orleans. And so I thought, because I'm so fucking twisted, that I'm going to have a hurricane themed 30th birthday party. But wait. Here's the deal. Mike had 2 truckloads of clippings of garden clippings brought from his client's house to his backyard, and had the back turned into like a war zone. So the pool was full of like tree limbs and shit. And it was like, there were down trees and branches all over his yard. And then I had a jazz band, like a New Orleans jazz band, and all Creole food, and a prop fan, like 100-mile-an-hour prop fan by the front door. So when you walked in, you got wind blasted. And the whole thing was hurricane themed, but all gifts were to be in the form of relief for Katrina victims. Okay. Little did I know that I have control over time, space, and the interplanetary shit. And Hurricane Wilma, literally dead hit on Lake Worth, Florida at exactly 1 minute after the party was to have started. So there was no party. We all escaped. I got the last flight out of Palm Beach Airport. A couple of friends of mine from Germany got stuck there for 5 days with no water and no gas. They were siphoning gas out of Mike's old cars to get in their rental car to get the fuck out of there and get to Orlando. So moral of the story: don't ever tempt fate by having a hurricane themed party, because you
during
will get
hurricane
hit with
season in an area that is known for hurricanes.
But while I was down there, this guy that I knew had found this car at a police auction and knew I was looking for one. It was 38,000 mile 87. So there were 2 years of the US 2.316. And I said, just buy it, whatever. Long story short, got home, picked it up, and had been seized as because it was a narc seizure. So narcotic seizure, and then was used by the Pittsburgh police force to pick up prostitutes. I don't know. I know nothing else. I have a friend that worked at the court system, and that was in the car's records. But other than the fact that the interior was kind of torn apart, taken apart, because they were probably looking for drugs, and there were ketchup packets all over this car, and there was ketchup smeared everywhere. I don't understand. The car was basically perfect. So I put
aside from being on fire and having been crashed, it was perfect.
It cleaned up. I mean, everything cleaned up. The car was really, really, really nice. Did a bunch of mechanical shit to it. Drove it for probably 3 years, and then sold it.
This one was a manual?
This was a manual.
And was it, they came in 2 colors. Which colors of the 2 colors was it?
It was Blau-Schwarz, otherwise known as black.
DB199.
Black
Pearl black in English.
Yeah. Sold it when I moved to California. I moved to Michigan with it, then sold it. And now, of course, the current 201 that I have is a Euro 1985 2.316, one of the original 5,000. So the first production batch pre-homologation. So this is the actual
car
homologation
that homologated the car for competition.
Yep. So this one smoke silver. This is exactly the spec that I wanted, which was smoke silver with plaid interior, rear headrests, manual, crank windows, and no other options. I could have dealt with air conditioning, but what I wanted was no push button air conditioning. I wanted the manual controls. It's 2,845 pounds with a full tank of gas, and that's a 16-gallon tank, so it's a lot of gas in there. It is, and it's 185 PS, so much, much, much quicker than the US car. US car revved to 6,500. This one revs to 7,100. And 164 to 185 PS, 164 horsepower.
170 PS.
170 PS
horse.
to 185 PS. It doesn't sound like a big difference, but it's night and day in the cars. So
the gearing also makes a significant contribution.
I've now had that car, I think 11 or 12 years. And it's magnificent. So that is my 190 story. You own?
I own the same car, but in Blau-Schwarz.
With air conditioning and
with air conditioning that was added. It does not have the push button. It has air conditioning that was added.
And rear headrest.
I can't remember whether it has rear headrest, honestly.
It's plaid.
It is plaid interior. Yeah. The criteria for me was that it had to be Blau-Schwarz with the plaid interior.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting the two cars. What year is yours?
85. Mine is
also.
earlier than yours because
That's
it doesn't
right.
have the articulating wiper.
Yep. So that was March 1st of 1985 production. Somewhere, I think it was, I'm doing this from memory. Mercedes went from the passenger side lying regular wiper that just did a standard swipe to the driver side. Is it the wrong way around?
No, you have it correct.
The driver side articulating wiper that got longer
Yes.
and shorter through its stroke to cover 87%.
It was 86% of the windscreen instead of 75%.
God,
so they got an additional 11% of windscreen coverage by adding the articulating wiper, which had debuted in the 124. So the early...
Really?
Yes. That's why they added that to the 190E at that time, because the 124 came out after the 201.
Yeah.
And
what year did the 124 go into production? 84?
84.
Okay, so it was
and the
a couple months later. Yeah.
went and debuted in December of 82.
Okay, so let's go back for a second.
Yes, let us go back and explain why this car exists at all and what it is.
Okay.
I think this now everyone's just like, it's a shitty small C-Class. And so people don't understand the significance of this car. Mercedes had toyed for a long time with the idea of making a smaller car. They had two sides. They made three effective cars. Effectively, they made three cars for a long period of time. They made a big sedan, the S-Class. They made a medium-sized sedan, which is now known as the E-Class. And then they had a two-door open car called the SL. And then they had this idea of adding a small car, a smaller sedan, which BMW had sort of done with the 3 Series, although the 3 Series had 2 doors, but it was basically a 3 Series competitor. And Mercedes in the 50s had actually toyed with making a small car and thought about experimenting with front-wheel drive. And this was all, of course, motivated by their desire to sell cars in the U.S. market. The U.S. regulations for the 1975 model year were corporate average fuel economy standards, CAFE, and that was basically stating that all the cars that you sold had to meet a certain threshold or fleet average fuel economy, and if you didn't do that, then you would be fined. And Mercedes was not interested in being fined, so they just put diesel engines in everything as a sort of stopgap solution until they could produce a more economical car.
I don't think most people realize that was the push behind Mercedes diesels. And I think it was something like 85% of all Mercedes sold in America from 1980, whatever it was.
Probably 79
79 through 85 were diesels.
Yes.
And they made this push, and it wasn't because they were technologically superior or anything else. This was out of necessity because Mercedes would not have otherwise been able to meet the fuel economy fleet requirement. Genius move.
Yes.
But garnered Mercedes a reputation for quality because that OM617 diesel lasts forever, legendary.
Might I add on the other also that if you want to understand the Mercedes had this reputation for technical innovation, and the 300 SD, the 116 300 SD, which came out in 78, really did have that because it was the world's first turbocharged passenger diesel car. And it
was quick.
It was quick by contemporary standards, and I encourage everybody to go watch the W126 Motor Week 300 SD test, because we think of those cars, you drive one now and you're like, man, this thing is just gutless and slow. And back then they were like, it's amazing, it's so fast and high performance for a diesel car, and just like they were absolutely bowled over by how performant it was, even though nowadays it's not at all.
Well, I mean, at that time you had the diesels you had were a 240D, which was the small car with E-Class,
the E-Class,
with 54 horsepower,
65.
Okay, I mean they're different. So when you come out with 120 horsepower turbocharged. 5-cylinder, 3-liter. That's a big deal.
Yes, it was a substantial move forward, even if the 0 to 60 time is like in the teens.
13, right?
Yeah.
13 to 15 versus 18 to 25. So, I mean,
Yep.
But so
substantial improvement.
V8 Cadillacs at the time were 12, 13, 14 seconds.
Yes. I mean, we've talked about this. The 380 SL was 12 and a half seconds to 60 miles an hour. An Alpha Spider was also 12 and a half seconds and a Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit was also 12 and a half seconds to 0 to 60 in the early 80s. So to get a diesel passenger car that accelerated in under 15 seconds to 60 miles an hour was actually quite noteworthy.
It's kind of funny that Mercedes sold both the 300 SD, again, the world's first turbocharged production diesel passenger car, and the 6.9 at the same time in the same body style, which was the world's fastest sedan-ish. there's some ambiguity there.
Yes.
But anyway, okay. So Mercedes' stopgap was to develop a diesel engine for the U.S. market, turbocharge it, and then the real solution was finally
a new, smaller car, which would be more aerodynamic and economical. And is this the sophistication of the 126 thing?
And a new family of engines.
Oh yes, a new family of engines. So it was called to demonstrate what a seismic shift they thought the car was. Instead of having the numbers of the chassis designation start with a 1, it started with a 2. So all the other cars were 114 and 115 and 126 and blah blah blah. This was a W201. It was the first ever W2, and I learned in doing this research why they did that, because it was such a seismic shift that they were like, we're going to start with the 2s, and then of course other 100 cars came afterwards, like the W140. But anyway, so W201, and then the new engine that was for that car was the opposite of that, 102, M102.
Yeah, W upside down is M,
yes.
And 201 becomes 102. Interestingly, though, the product planning people and the sales and marketing people had been pushing for a small car for many, many years, decades. And the Mercedes board kept telling them, absolutely not. It's not in the image of Mercedes. And it was the U.S. regulations that made them say, okay, fine.
I'm sure also the success of BMW with the 3 Series was a contributory causal factor as well.
I'm not sure it was that much of a factor at this point yet. I mean, I guess E21 had started.
Because BMW had come out with the 5 Series in 72, and then the 7 Series came out in 76 or something like that, and that's like them getting into Mercedes territory. And so my suspicion is that you say, okay, if they are now making 3 sizes of cars, the 3, 5, and 7 Series, then we should go, and they're trying to get up in our business, which in S-Class land, which is our sort of like territory decisively as Mercedes-Benz, then fine, we'll go after. This is my hypothesis only.
You're probably not wrong. I mean, E21 came out in what, 75, 76?
70, yeah, somewhere in there.
Somewhere in there, and that's about when this whole project was coming about. So I'm sure that was a factor. But the key point, though, is that the board said, we will give you, now there's a business reason why Mercedes needed to make a small car. But the permission to make a small car was based on a bunch of requirements. And this is where Mercedes diverges from any other car company in the world. It's like, okay, fine. We're going to need to make this car for regulations. However, it will have the same ride comfort as an S-Class. It will have the same driving position as an S-Class. It will have the same safety as an S-Class. And it will win the World Rally Championship to prove that this is a real engineering feat. I mean, come on.
Yeah, so all of that is true, perhaps, except for the World Rally Championship part. They did intend, of course, to rally the car, but pulled the plug on the rally program in December of 1980.
Yeah, because of the Audi.
Yes,
but that
exactly.
But hold on, the car was already done. The car was designed for use of 79, and there were two rally cars. So Mercedes figured So remember, this is a mandate from the board. This isn't like, hey, we'd like to do this. No, you're only allowed to build the car if. And so to win the World Rally Championship, they thought the best way to make the manufacturer's title happen, which is what they needed to win, was to have 2 cars, a short wheelbase car for hatchback that would work on the really tight and twisty sections, and then a long wheelbase car.
Events like Corsica and Monte Carlo and San Remo.
Right. So example. The tarmac stuff where you just need to change direction very quickly.
Yes.
And then a long wheelbase car that would be used on the higher speed stuff where stability is better.
And durability.
Right. And so they came up with 2 engines, the hatchback short wheelbase car, and there exist plenty of drawings of photos of prototypes on this.
They built one prototype of the hatchback.
Of the hatchback. Yes. 2, I thought it was. But anyway, you read the book this week. I read it 10 years ago. The hatchback had a 2.3 liter 16 valve, naturally aspirated, done by Cosworth. They shipped off the motor to Cosworth because all engineering resources within Mercedes-Benz were taken up on this W201.
They actually did make a 16 valve engine at Mercedes, and they couldn't get the power they needed to win in Group B. And so they said, okay, let's go to the people who
do this,
know how to do 4 valve heads, because Mercedes had not built a 4 valve head since 1939. And so they built one, and they were like, it's not going to make enough power to win in rallies, so let's go to the racing experts. Cosworth was founded in the 60s probably, and they had done the DFV, which is a sort of legendary engine that was used for, it was a variant of a Ford engine, basically, with a 4-valve head. So they knew all this stuff about making 4-valve heads, and so they said, let's go to the experts and see if they can do something with it. And so Cosworth designed a cylinder head for this thing, and then some people came over from Germany. They built an engine but never ran it, and then they sent it to Germany and ran it, and it made 267 horsepower from 2.3 liters for a racing car. So that was the engine for the hatchback, because they wanted something with really good throttle response for these sort of tight situations. And then the other engine was a 2.14 liter. There's a lot of people who made 2.14 liter engines during this period, because when you add the multiplier to it for forced induction, it turns into 3 liters. And so that's why Porsche did a bunch of 2.14 liter turbocharged engines. Likewise, Mercedes did as well. And they made like 450 horsepower from 2.14 liters, because it was a turbocharged version, a smaller turbocharged version of that engine. That was intended for the long wheelbase car, which would rally in stuff like East African Safari or Acropolis.
The long wheelbase, meaning the sedan that we all know today.
Yes, correct.
But then a little thing called an Audi Quattro came along.
Yes, and they all looked at it and they were like, fuck it.
Well, so remember that this was racing debut was scheduled for 1985, which was
no, they were gonna, because it was Group B, and Group B rules were coming out in 82. They were actually gonna try and run the car
that early.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were like, because the car debuted in December of 82 to the public, and they were like, can we run this thing during the 82 season even though the car hasn't been debuted yet? And they were like, yeah, I think so. So they wanted to be there at the beginning of Group B.
Interesting. I thought it was exactly 30 years from their motorsport ban. So remember that in 1955, Mercedes had that horrible accident.
Yeah, Pierre Levey at Le Mans in a 300 SLR. He swerved to avoid an Austin Healey, and lost control and flew into the crowd, and the car exploded and 80-something people died. And so they did not actively, officially race for a long time, and that's why when the 6.3 came out, the car was unofficially raced by some people who worked at Mercedes in Macau, which was far away, such that the mothership couldn't be like, you're not allowed to do this, blah, blah, blah. And so the car made its competition debut in Macau, of all places. And then the Red Pig was never an official Mercedes entry. It was an AMG entry, which was a separate aftermarket company.
A full ban, a ban on company sanctioned racing.
But they did do factory supported rallying in the 80s with the 500, 70s, late 70s with the 500 SLC, and the 280E did a little bit of rallying.
Was it fully factory supported, or the factory would just help?
It was always a little bit backdoor, which was the way that the 190 also was raced initially, until Mercedes was like, okay, fine, we're going to do, yes, sorry, we'll get there.
So anyway, they decide to, as part of the development of this car, they're going to suspend the ban on motorsport. However, Audi comes out with this Quattro. The engineers realize there is no chance to beat it. And so the board kills off the rally project in its entirety, and bans any further development of any part of that car, period. However, hold on. We're going to go back to the regular 190.
Yes, we do need to go back to the regular 190. Let's discuss the rear suspension. So
the 201 as a whole, though, brand new platform from the ground up, brand new car with a new family of engines and everything else. Right? This was a rethink of the automobile done by Mercedes-Benz. The development budget was untold, astronomical.
I've seen 600 million pounds sterling, including tooling and manufacturing.
600 million pounds sterling in 1980-ish. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't even know what the hell that is today. $10 billion probably.
Deutschmarks, I would say.
Deutschmarks? Well, the rear suspension was 4, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Okay, the rear suspension was 4 billion
Deutschmarks. Yeah.
So Mercedes was working on a new the world's first ever computer designed multi-link rear suspension.
Yes.
And they developed it originally for the 126 S-Class, but it wasn't done in time. So it wound up making its debut on the 190. But they went through, they built like 40 prototypes or something.
Yeah, they had a rig, and this rig was designed to have the suspension swapped on and off easily. And so I think they came up with like 80-something something designs, and then there was like 27 of them that were actually physically tested using the rig, because they would just dismount whatever suspension design and remount another one. But they, looked at like a Didion and, of course a swing axle, because it's Mercedes and they always use swing axles. But they ultimately came up with this thing which is like double wishbones but better, because there's a fifth link. Double wishbone, you imagine, the upper and lower ones, and that's 4 links, and then you add a fifth link to do camber compensation, and so that's effective, and each one was independent so that their motion could occur somewhat independently of the other links. So it's a 5-link design with camber control, and it's interesting because normally Mercedes-Benz and most manufacturers debut their most sexy technology in their biggest, most expensive car, and instead, when Mercedes is making their first ever small car, it's full of, I think, aerodynamically and stylistically, it's very innovative, and obviously technically too, because of the new family, the M102 engine, which then ended up in the 123 and the everything else, the 124 and the I guess that's it, those 3 cars and the SUVs. Yeah. So new engines, new suspension design, front and rear,
new design language.
New aesthetic design language also. And everyone, when you read the contemporary road tests, say this is through and through a Mercedes-Benz. It has much of the same great characteristics that make an S-Class an S-Class. It has this inherent greatness that makes it unequivocally a Mercedes-Benz.
Although the consumer market didn't really feel that way. So it was very interesting to see the original reaction if you read German period road tests and just overall car content from early 82, 83, 84. It was slow. People didn't like that. It was
depending on the engine.
Right. Well, this is the European result. There were
but with 123 PS or whatever, it was reasonable.
Listen, don't yell at me. I'm the messenger. But the reaction was the car was plasticky and it was cheap and it was not befitting of a Mercedes initially.
The U.S. response was very different.
Yeah, there were reliability concerns. There were just a bunch of teething problems. But by the time the car made it to the U.S. a year later, the reaction was, holy shit. Like you can have a big car personality and a little.
Yeah, I think the only thing people didn't like was the performance. I thought they found the engine was a little bit unrefined and it wasn't quite zippy enough.
Because it was a 4-cylinder.
Yeah,
right. It was incredibly short stroke 4-cylinder, but it was a 2.3 liter
in the US,
which is huge.
Yeah.
For a 4-cylinder without balance shafts. Mercedes compensated for that by using a very big bore, very small stroke,
and a heavy flywheel,
and a very heavy flywheel, plus fully counterweighted crank, and so not a zippy engine to rev. Didn't want to, wasn't like that. Yeah. But it was refined. Where the hell were we? We were talking about other 190. So that 5-link rear suspension had the best camber control of any suspension ever made. And other than the fact that it had recirculating ball steering, which was another Mercedes sort of legacy thing.
Supposedly it was done for crash and for parts commonality. They had actually even toyed with doing a front-wheel drive car, and I think they shit-canned that as late as 79, actually, that concept. But they said the car was too big for front-wheel drive, which I think is hilarious, because if you look at GM at this time, they have the full-size Cadillac convertibles, which are front-wheel drive. But
220 inches long.
Yeah, it just shows you the difference in what Mercedes is, how they're thinking about engineering cars. And they also wanted it to share parts with other models, potentially. And the 124 did draw a lot. The 124 E-Class did draw a lot from the 201.
It was
technically
an enlarged
speaking.
201. That's
yes.
all it was.
I think it was Automobile or Road and Track described the 190E as not so much a new car as a 7/8 perfect replica of an S-Class. Is the phrase that they put in their original road test.
And it should have been. The development budget was such that I did this research years ago, the rear suspension development budget alone was bigger than the development budget for the E30 as a whole.
The whole car.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I own an E30, 2 E30s. I've owned many 201s. There's such a rivalry between those two cars, and people are constantly, oh, this is better. Let me tell you. Touch the cars, work on them for 5 minutes.
Yes.
There is no comparison
in terms of quality and engineering.
There's no structure and how well every bolt is placed and how well everything is thought out. And the best example I can give is you get in a 201. Okay, this is a car that is smaller than a Fiesta. Right.
Yes.
There is no sedan on sale in America today that's as small as this thing. It looks big. It feels like it's big when you're driving it, but
unless you're in the back.
Yeah, but they're tiny. When you and they're light, right? 2,800 pounds for a tiny little sedan.
That's not that light given the car's size.
I mean,
given how well made it is.
Okay, fair enough. But I'm talking 2,800 pounds for a 2.316 with a sunroof and diff and big brakes and all the rest of the stuff. They were lighter than that. My point, though, is you move the seat back, you pull up one of the Mercedes floor, like a floor mat, and then there's carpeting underneath. I think I've talked about this on this podcast before, but the carpeting is buttoned down, like with little snap buttons. So you pull the snaps off and then you can pull the carpeting out. And then there's a false floor under that, which is Swiss cheesed plastic. And underneath that false floor are all the conduits and cables and brake lines, and everything is run in channels in there. And then if you pull that out, underneath all of that is a tar lined steel. You compare that to an E30 where you rip up the carpet and there's the fucking steel.
Floor pan,
like there's just every part of this car. It has two firewalls.
Yes.
Right? I mean, everything is about refinement.
To put mechanical things in and put more distance between the engine and the occupants.
Right. And also to isolate the battery from the heat of the engine compartment. So the battery's in between
and
the
the brake
firewalls.
booster.
And brake booster. Genius shit. I mean, just really cost no object engineering. And so these cars were 50% or more expensive than 3 Series.
Yes, and there was some American magazine that did a comparison against a Honda Accord, which was $13,000 and similar levels of performance. And basically their verdict was cost no object. Everybody chose the Mercedes. Price taken into account, everybody chose the Honda because the car was, $24,000 instead of $13,000. Right. It cost twice as much as an Accord and didn't offer more space or performance.
Yeah,
what it offered was, engineering.
But the interesting thing about the driving experience and living with one is going back to the board's mandates, which are that the car has to feel like an S-Class. It has to have it. I think the mandate was, again, this is like 10 years ago, the driving position, or it had to be indistinguishable from an S-Class from the driver's seat. And so you imagine how an engineer is going to interpret that mandate that's written in writing. So the first thing you notice is a car the size of a Fiesta, if you move the driver's seat all the way back, I am 5'10" and a half. I cannot even come close to reaching the pedals of the steering wheel. Yeah. I mean, the steering wheel's over there. It's made for 6'8" S-Class drivers, right? You can really fit huge people in this tiny little car.
However, one concession, it doesn't have a foot-operated handbrake or parking brake because that would the footwells were too narrow. So it has a regular pull-up emergency brake, unlike every other Mercedes ever, because they were like, we need this space in the footwell, so we're going to put the parking brake on the center console. Yeah.
But otherwise, it's indistinguishable from an S-Class. You have the big steering wheel directly
gauges
in front of you.
And the HVAC controls.
Everything looks like a Mercedes. And then it drives like it weighs 4,500 pounds. They are just, Mercedes.
In terms of ride quality and isolation and refinement.
We have suspension travel and we're not afraid to use it. That was the Mercedes way. Yes. So you have big body roll, but it's really well controlled. But in terms of handling, like just no contest to anything else from the era. I mean, that's what happens when you have good suspension. No understeer.
Yeah, they also did this thing where instead of the McPherson strut design where the shock absorber is inside of the spring concentrically, they have moved them to different locations, and then the damper mounts very close to the wheel so that you have more engine room space, which was helpful because they tilted the engines on their side by 15 degrees to keep the hood line low for aerodynamic reasons. So they used the space for that. And also you put the damper close to the wheel and it gives you more, I think, damping ability and authority over with a smaller damper because it is operating on a longer arm or closer to the farther from the fulcrum.
Right, closer to 1-to-1 to then you did 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. And then the way they designed that front suspension, it's got the turning radius the size of a smart
forklift,
car. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Every other car I've ever owned feels like
the 202 is like
the 202 is the same way.
The 202 has a wonderfully small turning radius.
But you get into like a Volkswagen or even an E30, which is a pretty tight turning radius. No contest.
Yeah. It's just a beautifully engineered car that really doesn't give up anything to any other Mercedes. And to think that Mercedes was making sort of the best engineered, highest quality cars in the world at the time, and that you could get that in a car that size. And so now these things are basically free. And the people who are into them are like, appreciate all that. But the rest of the population are just like, I don't know, it's small and cheap and $3,500 or $2,500 or $1,500 on Facebook.
I mean, there's a lot of things about that car that people look at and don't understand the engineering behind it. So the wiper was one of those things we talked about. The other one's the taillights. The ribs on the taillights were done by the engineers together with Mr. Sacco, of course, as a design element, but the idea of having ribbed taillights.
I mean, we should credit Herr Geiger also, because that had come out in the early 70s, probably 73 is when that appeared on the... on the 107 and the 115.
The idea there is just increasing the amount of surface area of the taillights so that when they're dirty, i.e. snowy or muddy, that they still transmit more light.
And supposedly they were designed to self-clear, but I don't know that actually works.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've never, driving in that 190 2.0 through many, many winters, I don't think I ever had to clear the taillights off. I mean, whatever, the cars just worked. They were researched to death and engineering led. And they're not the type of car that you look at and say, well, that's beautiful, until you look at it.
Yeah. And the deeper you get into one of these cars, the better it becomes as a device. I
mean, they are just so simple. Like, I feel like many of the best automotive designs of all times are done by Italians working for German car companies. All the Giugiaro stuff, all of the Sacco stuff. But Sacco's stuff was so incredibly simple that it's easy to overlook the brilliance of it. That car is teardrop shaped. So if you look at a 190 from above.
From above.
No, from above.
From above, but from the side it's wedged.
The whole back tapers in, and then from the side it's wedged. Well, that was done for aero.
Yes.
So at the time...
and also to make the trunk larger because it's taller in a short car.
But it was one of the most aerodynamically efficient cars ever made.
Yeah, it was 0.33 when it came out, and then they did this publicity stunt. We haven't really started talking in earnest about the 2.316, but they did some modifications to those cars because they did this endurance test thing with them, and they got the cars to like 0.28 or something like that by blocking off the front grille and
removing the mirrors.
And they lowered the ride height, and then they got the car down to 0.28.
Right. And so this is the Nardo test. This was in 1982, late 82?
No, this would be summer. It was hot. It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So this would be August of 83.
Because the car made its official debut. Okay.
Because the car debuted officially a month later at Frankfurt in September.
Okay, so now we're back to the performance variant that had to win the World Rally Championship, but then was banned from further development.
Yes. So they continued to develop the...
I couldn't tell anyone. Yeah.
Yes, quietly continued to develop this engine because they were like, we're onto something here, and also if we want to stick it to BMW, then we should come up with a more youthful, appealing performance variant of the car.
So this is how they sold it internally. So how the product team sold it to the board was that we are looking for a younger buyer with this car, and other people are modifying their cars in this segment. So look at BMW, you have Hartke, you have all these other companies that were modifying E21s. And they thought, well, we should come out with a pre-pimped, to use the Mark V Volkswagen ad campaign, pre-pimped version of our car that will already appeal to young people. And we'll call it the 190 Sport.
Yes.
That was a complete line of bullshit. It was never meant to appeal to younger people.
Yeah, not at $35,000 when you
in 1986, when you could buy an E30 M3 for 27 2 years later.
That cheap? I thought they were. I thought those things were too expensive to be popular.
They were. But at 325i was 27, fully loaded.
Yes, for 325. Yes.
But so they sold this bullshit story to the management. Yes, we make the Sport 190. It's for sell to young people, but they continued to develop it for motorsport. But what they did was take the naturally aspirated engine from the short wheelbase hatchback and put it in the regular wheelbase sedan, i.e. the long wheelbase car, and just developed it as a sports sedan, basically. Officially, unofficially, 100% developed this thing for racing. Absolutely 100%. And how we know that's the case is there's a great picture that I can't find, but I have somewhere, of the 5,000th 2.316 rolling off the line in like April of 85, I think it was. And so it's 5,000, and you see all of these engineers who are smiling and a bunch of management people who look very like confused. And you think, why we are going to make 2.1 million of these cars? Like, they did sell a shit out of this thing. Why do we care about 5,000?
Because that is the number of production cars you must make in order to homologate the car for Group N and Group A.
Which is exactly what happened the next day. I have the FIA homologation papers.
May 1st, 1985.
Yep. It's all listed right there. So they immediately homologated the thing for racing and said, okay, you guys could take it to like rallying and shit, or you could take it to DTM, which was the new touring car.
New for 86 was this German touring car championship. And so they ran the cars with moderate success, actually.
Not they. Other people.
Other people, not Mercedes. People. Yes, other people.
Other people that had
privateers,
like AMG and other companies that had absolutely
no support at all.
No.
From Mercedes-Benz.
No. So what they were doing is throwing parts
and there
out
were
the back door.
certainly like not any Mercedes-Benz engineers ever spotted in paddocks at racing events.
Of course not. There is a verbot. There is a ban on the motorsports precipitation.
Yes.
Whatever. It's raining. It's precipitating. Yeah.
The car was homologated from the 1st of May 1985. DTM's first season was 86. The cars were like moderately successful, but they didn't actually ever win a DTM championship until 92 with Klaus Ludwig. They got second a couple of times. They won individual events, certainly. And so, let's return for a moment to this endurance test at Nardo that happened in August of 83.
So there's this 2316 that's called the 190 Sport and definitely doesn't have any racing intention.
Yes, but we could set some records with it instead.
We could set some world records, yeah. And I think part of this, all of this was probably a push from Mercedes marketing to say, people are going to push back on the idea of a small, quote unquote, affordable. It was $70,000 in today's money for a base 190, basically. A Mercedes that's not a real Mercedes. So let's figure out ways to prove that the engineering is up to Mercedes standards. And one of them was to do a top speed run at Nardo.
Yes, so they ran the car. There were 3 of them. They modified them. They took the cooling fans off of them. I think they might have removed the power steering. They took the side mirrors off. They lowered the ride heights.
All within
relatively
FIA.
Straightforward stuff. They changed the rear axle ratios.
They also it has
larger fuel tanks,
different fuel injection. I mean, there were a bunch of.
Well, they removed like cold start enrichment and stuff like that because you don't need that if you're running the cars for 8 days straight. And nights. So they ran the cars for 8 days continuously, day and night. 201 hours.
You'll see where this came from, yeah?
3 cars, and they set speed records.
I thought only 2 finished. I thought 1 broke with
really?
Distributor failure or something.
I was not aware of this.
But the cars had spares in them. And you remember that was part of the FIA thing is they had to have any parts that broke on the car had to come from within the car. So they the trunks were filled with spare shit, whatever.
So they ran them 50,000 kilometers and they set records for 25,000 kilometers, 25,000 miles, and 50,000 kilometers at average speeds.
54 miles an hour.
Yes. And the longer the distance, the higher the average speed was. So their record speed for 50K was higher than their record speed, than the average speed for 25K, because the longer they ran the cars, the higher the average speed went.
Right. And all they did was, I think they changed oil like 3 or 4 times. And by the way, the 154 miles an hour is the average speed over 201 hours, including
stops,
0.
While fueling and doing driver changes.
Yep. And ripping off they probably had, or cleaning off the windshield. You have these great shots. Everyone's in like 80s short shorts. Yeah, but like 154 miles an hour.
In 100 degrees Fahrenheit also.
In 1980 something. When nothing could go that fast.
Yeah.
And here's this 4-cylinder Mercedes, which is crazy. It was faster than any V8 Mercedes, the fastest Mercedes produced at the time, top speed. The 500s were not as quick.
Not as fast.
Not as fast. I think it was also the quickest accelerating, if I remember correctly.
They were like 7 seconds, 7.4.
Well, and by Europe standards, the US cars, the Euro cars by US 1 foot rollout to 60 miles an hour or whatever will be 6s. 6.4, 6.5. They were quick. But so they did this attempt, and then
a month later they debuted the car publicly. So this record had already been set, and they had all the press photos of. I mean, the cars are filthy. When the car debuted in September of '83 at Frankfurt, together with the diesel version at the same time. So here you go, diesel or 150 mile an hour version.
Yeah,
your choice.
And I think they sold out the first year production on the show floor,
which was inconvenient because Cosworth was not able to deliver enough cylinder heads to really get the cars into customer hands for almost a year.
Yeah, took a while.
So And then that's why the homologation didn't occur until 85.
Right. So, but then you have the other stunt, which I love, which is, okay, Mercedes, there's the Nürburgring that we all know is the Nordschleife, the North Loop. And then there's the new Grand Prix circuit that's made because of all the horrible accidents that happen at the Nordschleife.
Yeah, so that they can run Formula One in a safe, contemporary, modern fashion at the Nürburgring.
At this new Nürburgring GP circuit.
Correct.
And the opening event ever, the opening race at the Nürburgring, Mercedes, they got out bags of money and they gave the Nürburgring and the FIA people millions.
And the track owners.
And said, hey, which is probably the state of, it's probably a government owned, whatever, whatever it was, they're like, listen, we have this new little thing that's definitely not a race car and certainly not a homologation car. And of course, will never wind up in a racetrack. But wouldn't it be funny if right before the race,
the F1 race,
the Formula One race that's about to happen, the first ever race at the Nürburgring Grand Prix circuit, we get a bunch of Formula One legends and let them battle it out in 20 identical non-race car versions of a non-race car of a 190 Sport, just, to show that maybe this car could appeal to younger people.
Yes.
And
this was taking a page out of the Pro Car series, which had been discontinued a few, 2 or 3 years earlier from BMW M1s, where they put all these, famous drivers in these cars and ran them around. So, the roster of people driving these cars is just absolutely nuts. You have Sterling Moss, Phil Hill, Keke Rosberg, Ayrton Senna was there, Niki Lauda, who else? Denny Hulme. I forget.
What's his name? James Hunt.
James Hunt
didn't show up because he was hungover and they gave his seat to somebody else. Or it might have been, and somebody got sick and Senna wound up as a replacement for somebody who didn't show up. No one had heard of Ayrton Senna at this point. And the real race wound up, they fucking went for it. That's the best part is watching this race.
And it's also
back.
Raining, of course.
Yeah, of course. So you see the crazy wipers that no one's ever seen before.
And everyone's going sideways because it's moist.
And the car doesn't understeer. Yeah. Yes. So these guys are fucking moving. And the race wound up being Senna passes everybody, and he's an upstart. No one knows who he is, and he pisses all the other guys off. So you have half the guys who are beating the shit out of these cars and don't care, and the other half who are taking it seriously. And then you have Lauda and Senna who are fucking going for it, and Senna won. Yeah. And this was why he wound up getting recognized by, was it who hired Ferrari? Hired him after this, right? There's a fucking quote from somebody who was like, get him after this. Anyway, really did a number to jumpstart his fame.
Awareness of him as being zippier than Niki Lauda.
Yeah.
And Niki Lauda, of course, is always trying when he's on a racetrack.
Yep.
He doesn't not try.
Pretty cool.
Unlike James Hunt.
So the cars were praised pretty significantly for being among the best handling cars ever made. Best, sedan chassis ever. But they didn't sell worth a shit in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, the value proposition is at $35,000, I think, is similar to the way that Americans approached the E30 M3.
I thought they were 38.
I think, so the things that I've read when they first announced the car in, 85 in the U.S. Calendar year 85.
So the car went on sale, was for sale in the U.S. as an 86 and an 87 model. Conveniently, the 86s all have recessed sealed beam headlights and the 87s have refreshed 9004 headlights, so you can tell them apart. Otherwise, they're functionally the same. And I think Mercedes-Benz North America did not understand what this car was. Of course, no one knew what rallying was. No one still does in the general public. So they said, well, if this is going to be the top of the line car, it needs to be spec'd as such. And so they came with every conceivable option standard.
Mercedes has always done this with U.S. cars. Everybody always does this with U.S. cars because they think American consumers want high levels of equipment.
But at this price, you have power seats with memory, power windows,
airbags,
mirrors, airbag, one of them.
Airbag.
All 86 model year Mercedes-Benz were sold with airbags.
Driver's side.
And they spec'd the shit out of it. Leather seats, front and rear. The only options you could get were heated seats, rear headrests, and I think that was it. I thought there was one more. No, it was cam stand. It was a cam stand with everything. But $38,000 was the same price as a really well-equipped 5 Series.
I remember reading just recently, in this research, the car was actually, I think the 2.6 was $1,000 less than a 300e.
Yeah, that would make sense.
So
which was probably...
So everyone was like, you should buy a 300e instead, probably. Or maybe it was the 2.316.
Well, the 2316 had a problem when...
One of them was within $1,000 of
the E-Class.
Of the 300e. And so they were like, yeah, for most people, I think the 300e is going to be the right answer. That's what
and you could get it with a stick. Yeah. And it wasn't a dog leg, which of course we think is cool, but freaks some people out.
Yeah.
The
automatic transmission is the other option you were missing from the list.
I've never driven an automatic 2.316, and I hope to never. But it was a really hard sell. So they sold 1,839 in the US.
This is your car.
Am I thinking? Yeah.
They made 40,000 of 40, or was it 20?
So it's 20,000. So if I remember correctly,
20,000 2.3s.
It's 20,000 2.316s and 18,970 whatever it was M3s, right? So the 2316 worldwide outsold the E30 M3. However, and that's by the way 2316, 2516, and the Evo 1 and Evo 2, and then all of the variants of E30 M3 also, including convertible, Evo 1, Evo 2, and Sport Evo. So overall, I
thought it was 20,000 only 2.3s, and then like 10 or 15,000 2.5s, and then 1,000 Evos.
I don't know.
Somebody
will fact check us.
Yeah, I know. I should have
Jake will
these
probably
numbers.
He'll put a thing on the bottom
at hand.
It'll point to idiot and has it right or something. See, you guys probably already seen this. But point is, in worldwide, the 16-valve Mercedes outsold the 16-valve E30s. Mm-hmm. However, in the U.S., I think it was 5,001 E30 M3s and 1,839 or 1,936 or something, under 2,000 190 16-valves. And the reason why was, number one, BMW kept those cars on sale for a long time.
Yes.
But no one understood what this Mercedes was. No one got it.
The other thing is that those cars tend to be presented as competitors, and in some places they were, but in the United States you barely could buy those two cars at the same time, because the Mercedes came first, and then the E30 didn't appear until 87, calendar year 87. And so they were never directly competing with each other in the US market, although in Europe they didn't then, they were, because they produced these cars until 93 in Europe, but we only got them for a couple of years in the US, probably because they sold so poorly.
Yeah. And the problem was also that at the same time, Mercedes was obviously listening to the feedback from the US market on the 190e 2.3, which is the regular car, and re-engineered the front of that car for the 2.6 liter 6-cylinder. Mm-hmm. And that came out in
87,
somewhere in there. So at the same time, for far less money, you could get a 6-cylinder. Sounds kind of like the E30 M3/325i dilemma, where you can get a manual 6-cylinder, and the 190 2.6 is a magical car to drive, especially when you swap in a 3-liter from the 300e, because it's the same external dimensions.
At that point, you may as well do a 24-valve swap.
I mean, that's a different thing. You can literally swap in the 3-liter block and not tell the fuel injection or anything else, and you have a 3-liter.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the 190 was a bit of a hard sell as a 16-valve in the US. But I think the rest of the world got it because they were watching DTM. Mm-hmm. And DTM was more widely watched and more widely attended than Formula One was.
Yeah, they had a huge schedule of events. I mean, it would be like more than, 24 events or something like that, or I think, or maybe it was even 30. But they had a lot of events, and they're all geographically nearby because it's a German event. It's German based, and so you're all in continental Europe. You don't have to go all over the world if you want to watch the races. And
the stands were packed, and millions watched it on TV. I mean, this was...
Well, the cars are all fairly competitive with each other in terms of pace, and so the racing was just absolutely wild.
Probably some of the best racing ever.
Yeah, it's like Spec Miata racing, right? You put a bunch of guys all in approximately the same car, and it just gets real wild.
But unlike Spec Miata, the budgets were nuts. So what happened is 190 2.316 gets homologated in 1985. And then in 1987, hold on. Yeah, it was production starts 84, 85. God, I have a timeline that I remember writing for an article about this years ago. Early 85, Mercedes gets homologation. 86, BMW comes out with E30 M3. Now, don't forget that the E30 M3 has a bunch of advantages. Number one, fully factory-backed racing from the get-go, number one. And number two, they knew exactly what target they had to beat with the Mercedes. Mm-hmm. And so I talked to Joost... what the hell's his name? He's currently in Joost Capito and the other one that's in for Dieselgate, who did the S14 street version, Wolfgang Hatz. And I talked to both of these guys who were part of the E30 M3 program back in the day. And I asked them both, like, well, hey, what were the targets? Like, did you have to get this by this? And they both said the same thing. Beat that fucking Mercedes. And that was the official target for E30 M3. So it had to be 0.2 quicker to 100 kilometers an hour. They knew exactly where the targets were, and they knew they couldn't beat the top speed, but they had to match the top speed. So E30 got that crazy fake trunk lid to raise the rear window and the cap on the roof and all this other crazy shit just to get close to the 0.32 that the Mercedes had. Never got close. I think it was 36 or 34 that they got. But so, first mover advantage is not usually an advantage when you're racing, because now everyone knows exactly what the target is. E30 M3 comes out in 86, gets homologated, and the two of them start racing, and immediately BMW is working on the Evo 1.
Yes.
So their Evo 1 was fucking immediate, and then immediate 2 was shortly thereafter. Meanwhile, now Mercedes privateers are racing this car, and they're doing okay.
Like trying to get the thing together and developing it, and AMG's doing some stuff to it. But yeah, at some point, I think it was for the 87 season, Mercedes is like, okay, we're going to officially start racing.
Well, you know why? Because they were getting crucified by BMW.
Yes.
So this is the great irony, is the board said, you cannot race this car, period. Full ban on motorsports. Yes. And the engineers are throwing parts out the door, and then Mercedes is like, why are we not winning? And then the same board that says you can't do this is like, okay, there was a change in board, but if I remember correctly. But they were like, wait, hold on a second. We're getting our ass kicked over here? We're not our ass kicked. It was, we're competitive, but not winning every race.
BMW is winning them.
Yeah. And
initially, and I learned this recently, that in the debut season of the car in touring car, the car that the 190E 2.3 got second place to was a Rover SD1.
That's fantastic. We own that
absurd.
thing.
So you have both of those cars.
My God, I love it.
You have both of the touring car.
Rally champion.
So yes, and then Ford won a subsequent year, and then when the BMW arrived, then it was winning, and so Mercedes finally, with factory backing, starts to be genuinely competitive, comes out with the Evo versions.
Well, first it was a 2.5, right? So the idea was...
Well, for racing, sorry.
So yeah, the idea was they would, as a stopgap, put a long stroke version of the 2.3 liter into the street cars. And that was the 190E 2.516 long stroke, high compression.
But that car never raced.
That engine never raced. But that was to compete against the E30 M3 to take back the acceleration title, basically, because the BMW had a catalytic converter, and when they catalyzed the 2.3 liter, they lost so much power that the E30 was significantly faster. So they did, for the street cars, got 2.516, and then the race cars got the Evo 1.
Which were also 2.5 liters, but a different 2.5 liters.
Different engine, yeah.
Yes, it's a different 2.5 liters, but the displacement is the same, but they did it by boring it. Yes, not exactly the same. But they're both 2.5 liter engines, but they're different engines because one is bored and the other is stroked.
Exactly. And so that
which is also true of the Evo 2.5 versus the regular 2.5. And so people are like, why is the Evo 2.5 so much more expensive than the regular 2.5? It's because they have different engines.
Different engines, yeah.
So the Evo rules, generally speaking, for homologation are thus, which is that if you want to homologate an Evo version of a car to go racing, you can do it, but you have to build 10% of the homologation number. And so you have to build 500 of whatever it is if you want to take some improved version of the car racing. And so that's what the Evo 1 and Evo 2
and why there are 502 of each.
Yes, exactly.
501 or 502 each.
Yeah, it depends who you ask.
And meanwhile, so now Mercedes, the board says, fucking go get BMW. And they throw the Evo 1 out, and then BMW is already on its Evo 2, E30 M3. And then finally they've had enough, and this is going to be the end of it, and they both go for broke. And their budgets on the DTM race program was far in excess of what Formula One was spending was at the time. And so then there became the 190E Sport Evo, I'm sorry, the 190 Evo 2, which
Yes.
is the most outrageous fucking thing anyone's ever seen.
Yes.
But the best part is Piech called it hideous.
Well, and the reason why Piech is interested in commenting is because for 1990, Audi joins the DTM party with the V8 Quattro, which is spiritually very different from the other cars, with four-wheel drive and a probably 3.6 liter V8. And they won DTM in 90 and 91 with a S-Class sized car, which I love that Audi was doing this at this time.
With a V8 that was two Scirocco 16 valve motors joined at the crank.
So it was an interesting solution. And so Mercedes is like, God damn it. And so Audi won twice and BMW was winning before that. And Mercedes finally won in 92.
Well, so the great quote was that when the Evo 2 debuted, sold out immediately on the show stand, all 500 of the cars. But the Piech said it was hideous. And then BMW's, was it Reitzle? What head of R&D, what the hell was his name, said that wing is totally stupid on the record. Think about this. No executives would say this, was that is totally stupid. And then said to somebody else, if that wing works, the laws of aerodynamics must be different between Munich and Stuttgart.
Yes.
And if it works, I will build a new wind tunnel.
And he did?
He built a new wind tunnel because the fucking wing worked.
Yes, and it had come from they had hired an aerodynamicist in Stuttgart who was at the university to say, how do we make the aero of this thing appreciably better? Yeah. And that was the result. One of my favorite things, which is just a sort of contravening of the rules about that whole body kit, is that part of it is this thing that covers the top third or so of the rear window. And the reason why they did you come across this ever, of the reason why they I
thought it was to send air to the lower wing, because there are two wings.
No, this is a misconception. The rules stated that any wing that you added could not interfere with rear visibility. And so they made the rear visibility worse so that the rear wing was not participating in rear visibility.
Get the fuck out. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That was already like one of my number one cars of all time. And it just became like number 0.9.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
I love that was their solution, right? They are meeting the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law.
And so finally, once Mercedes got full backing and that Evo 2, they were revving to 11 or 12,000 RPM.
I think it was like 10.3 is what I recall.
At the end? I thought the very end they were way over 10. Either way, they were making
10,000
ridiculously horsepower. 10,000 RPM.
Yeah, 375 horsepower out of 2.5 liters, naturally aspirated.
Yeah. And so once they had factory backing, they really were competitive to the M3 and did eventually win the season after BMW retired, or the season during which
it was the season during which Ford retired because there were no turbocharged cars allowed anymore. And somebody else had stopped racing as well at the same point. It was Alfa or Audi. Yeah. It was one of those two.
So the ultimate
I think it
victor,
was probably Audi, because they probably banned turbocharging and four-wheel drive in DTM for the 92 season.
The ultimate victor was the E30 M3 of the two, because it won more races. But the second most winning touring car was the 2316 or the Mercedes 16 valve. And there was no one even close. I mean, different people won different titles, but in terms of number of races won, not even close.
Well, they both raced for longer than Audi. Audi only raced for 2 seasons and won both. And then they were like, okay, we're done here. And went home.
We have shit on you and we go home now. Yes. This is the Piech way.
Yes, exactly.
But so now to own, how long are we in this? Oh my God, we're over an hour. Okay, so we need to wrap this up. To own them, what do they like to own? To drive?
They are a pleasure. They handle well. They are the engines are smooth. I have not yet driven the Evo cars. But I soon will be driving, I think, the Evo 2, Lord willing.
I would say the Evo 2 is the best driving one in terms of drama overall. It is 8,000 RPM or 7,800 RPM out of a 2.5 liter. It basically feels like a 2316 with a quick steering rack or box and really tight suspension. Not harsh, just very, very tight. Mm-hmm. The next one in the rung of superiority is the early non-catalyzed 2316, like our cars. No, because it's the fastest. The 2516 Evo 2 was the only one that was almost as quick as the early cars. I don't think they're any
this is
quicker.
the car where they all came with the Power Pack. It was called the AMG Power Pack, which gives you 235 horsepower, and that's like a larger intake manifold and exhaust.
And I think they were the only one to match I've never seen a race between the early homologation spec car with no cat and the late 516 Evo 2. But the Evo 2 was much heavier. They were 3,000 pounds versus 2,800.
Despite the use of carbon fiber.
Yeah. Well, adding carbon fiber is still adding material. But the wheels were much bigger. The brakes were much bigger.
Yes, because they wanted to be able to race with 19-inch wheels. So
they had air conditioning. They have power windows. I mean, they were just, they were a very different spec. Catalytic converters, which are heavier. But I was talking to a really cool guy that I met at Monterey Car Week with a 2516 that was just like, I just licked the car for an hour in the parking lot.
Evo 2 or
Evo
1?
2.
Yeah.
I think it was him saying he had a 185 PS car, the early car, and it was faster than the Evo. I drove an Evo 2 back to back with my car, and I couldn't tell you which one's quicker. It's another 800 revs, 700 revs, so it's more spicy. But I think I'd rather, for the visual statement, obviously, for every reason, I'd rather have an Evo 2. But they are $500,000 at this point.
Yeah.
And the early cars are 20, 30, 40,000. So it's it's an order of magnitude difference in price.
Genuine order of magnitude.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess the world, a really nice early car could be 60, 70, 80,000 bucks.
Yeah.
But then at the absolute bottom, having never driven an automatic, would be the US car. I love the chassis. I love the build quality. I do not love the engine nearly as much as the Euro car.
Especially with the gearing.
And I've never driven it too, because the gearing's short, which I usually love, but it doesn't work with the engine's torque characteristics, and it doesn't work with the shifter. And I've never driven a 2.516, but I suspect
Or an Evo 1?
Or an Evo 1.
I suspect the Evo 1 and Evo 2 are fairly similar to each other. When you read the differences in them, I mean, they both have the big bore engine as the big bore 2.5. So I suspect that if you want, and I think the Evo 1 looks pretty cool as well.
I don't know if I would want the liability of prices for parts on an Evo 1 without the visual impact of it. That's the thing. Then I'd rather have
It costs half as much as an Evo 2, though.
Yeah, but I'll give me an Imundine. What's that car?
Imundine Rot, yeah.
Yeah, what's it called in English?
Garnet.
Garnet. Give me a garnet red 2516 street car, and you have, I mean, that color is stunning.
Yes.
And it's a color.
I also learned why they did the early cars were only available in two colors. It's because the body kit was the same color throughout, and so they said we can only make plastic in these two colors and have it sort of look good. We can't have other colors of plastic. They didn't just, this is so Mercedes-Benz, right? They're not going to paint the body kit. They're going to make the whole plastic all the way through the material be the same color as the car, so that if you scrape it, you can't see it. It's
not painted.
I guess they paint over it, I assume, but I think the plastic is also the same color.
Underneath is similar.
Is the same color.
And
that was because they could only make that plastic in those two colors initially.
Oh my god!
So very Mercedes.
Later on,
they figured out how to do it in silver and Amandine Rot, or they just were like, we're going to paint it. But anyway, that's why they were only those two colors early on. Anyway, so this has been the 190E story.
We should have waited until episode 190. Although isn't this 119?
This could be 200.
This is 120?
I don't know. Or episode 201 is what this should be.
Well, 120 rearranged is 201, so this is episode 201.
Okay.
Come back next week where we'll probably do an E30 M3 episode or something. I'm kidding.
No, we both kind of dislike that car.
Yeah, we're done. We have nothing more to say about that. We both own a 190 2.316. Neither of us has ever owned an E30 M3.
Yes, there you have it.
Opinions are like assholes.
Everyone has one.